right, welcome to the latest Mosaic Minute. I'm Ben Scanlon with Neeti Patel. In these Mosaic Minutes, we just want to share the knowledge we've gained from our years of working with dozens of different clients in go-to-market in the marketing space. So we think we have some interesting things to share, but we are trying to make these a little more fun. So Neeti, updates on the construction.
Yeah, well, as you can see, I'm back to the plain wall again, but I'm actually not in my house. The construction was getting way too loud. And so I am at my mom's condo where it's much quieter, but much more boring, apparently. Yeah. Can't win.
I'm glad you're not by the construction because these are like high quality video productions.
I know, it's true.
And then also any updates on the softball team? How'd you guys do this week?
Softball team, the weather's been not great in Northern Virginia. So the rain, I'm not sure if we're going to have t-ball practice today. But those t-ball girls, they got more outs than the older girls last game. So yeah, they're pretty good.
Is this the team you're the head coach on, or
No. So for those of you who are not intimately familiar with my coaching career, I head coach my older daughter's team, which is an 8U softball team, and I assistant coach for my younger daughter, who is on a t-ball team. Okay. I do switch every year, so each girl gets me as a head coach, but I can't do both. I did that one season, and it was too much.
Yes. Well, I was going to give credit to the head coach, but I'll give credit to the assistant coach in this time. So actually you shared some interesting content this morning with me, and we posted on LinkedIn about some things that McKinsey's seeing in the M&A space, and what does it mean?
Yeah, I think they wrote, it's no surprise to anyone that there's been a tremendous amount of M&A activity, especially with private equity companies who are looking to kind of grow their portfolio companies by acquiring new companies, and it's called a buy and build strategy. And so the article was about, that always looks good on paper. But one of the things that a lot of deal teams and executive teams tend to forget is really thinking about the integration strategy when it comes to combining two companies. And unfortunately, poor integration can really impact the benefits you can see from an acquisition. And so this article is just kind of outlining some of the things to keep in mind when you're thinking about integrating two companies and some of the pitfalls that can arise. And I think the thing that really spoke out to me was the idea of cultural integration. So obviously there's, you need to integrate your teams and your systems and kind of all of the operational infrastructure of the two companies. And then there's this idea of really aligning the two companies around a joint vision and making sure that the culture is aligned and integrated, and that the employees all feel kind of a sense that they're part of one company, not two companies that were stuck together. And I think a lot of those things just tend to be deprioritized, eventually fall off the radar until it becomes a problem down the road. And we say this all the time in our work. It's just carve out that time up front to address these things, and trust us, it will save you a lot of time later down the road.
And this is becoming increasingly important. I mean, when we first started out years ago, just as an aside, Neeti got a message on LinkedIn, and they're like so trivial now, but it said she'd been working with Mosaic for many years, way longer than she actually was. But which is just kind of funny about these bad sales outreach. Anyway, but when we first got started, I mean, the number of acquisitions we saw, we could probably count on one hand. Now I feel like every single client that we deal with is doing some sort of acquisition. So this is just becoming increasingly important. And we've seen the ups and downs of, both good culture, creating good cultural alignment and not addressing it up front.
Yeah.
All right. Well, today we want to talk about one thing. There are many things, but one thing that's really important to make sure that your company can scale its growth effectively. And that is strong reporting. And I think one of the things that we've seen is that not having accurate reporting can create many different issues. And an example I like to use is that we had two clients in a very similar position. One, they had both created very strong brands. They've been growing at a quick pace. They received investment, and we went in and started the engagement with those brands. With one of them, we're able to establish very strong reporting, which gave like great insight. Everyone bought off on it. And the other one, they just never were able to establish agreed upon reporting. And so it was really interesting to see what happened next, because as we always say, like what gets you from A to B is not necessarily what's going to get you from B to C or C to D. And so the one company that had established strong reporting, we saw that they had like a significant drop in conversion rates, and it was really hard to figure out why. So they brought in a new CEO and they pivoted they completely changed their technology stack. They had been doing a lot of in-house development that wasn't well supported, and so it was really closing out their visibility. So they saw this change in their numbers, and they actually made the change in the way that their strategy was implemented, and it made a big difference in terms of their growth. This other company, a very similar position, which had a strong brand, they just, mostly because of cultural reasons, were never able to get good reporting in place. And so they did grow. We were able to drive growth. A lot of things that we did were very successful from a top of the funnel perspective, but they were never really able to achieve that transformational growth when we were with them, just because there was so much, discussion over reporting. They were never able to get their numbers aligned. And so it's just like a very clear case. These two examples are very clear case of how important reporting can be and how it can sort of underpin your strategic direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And you would think like the hardest part of establishing reporting is the tracking and kind of setting up the actual infrastructure to pull in the data. But I would say where most companies end up getting tripped up is in defining the key metrics and gaining alignment on where those key metrics are reported and what they mean. And that's where I think this other company just kind of couldn't get past it. There was just very strong opinions from different stakeholders around what was accurate, what wasn't, what source we should be looking at for various KPIs. And there wasn't a willingness to really work through that. And so unless you can come to a place where everyone really buys in to the reporting that you have, and really trusts that reporting, even the best looking dashboard is not going to make a difference within the organization.
It's a good point, because like with that first organization that was able to sort of drive that transformational growth, it was still a really painful discussion about how they needed to transform. Like they had vested interest in saying, like, the developers, like, this is my baby, like I want to make this work this way. Other people are like, well, this is the data source, this is the way I've always done it. And if they were having debates over what the data meant, it could have just been a total disaster. But because they're able to sort of have a unified understanding of what the data meant and what the metrics meant, they were able to like move away from that. So it's still super contentious, but we were able to eliminate a lot of the debates around like what the data meant. And so they're actually able to move on.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And it's worth working through the pain, because it saves you so much headache down the road. Otherwise, every time you have a board meeting, every time you need to kind of explain why something happened, this is something we've talked about previous episodes, but it's, if you don't hit your numbers, that's one thing. If you can't explain why you hit your numbers or why you didn't hit your numbers, that's a whole other problem. And so if you don't take the time to align on reporting up front, then every single time these things arise, you're going to go through the same painful exercise of, well, let's look at this data. No, wait, let's look at this data. And then someone comes in at the last minute. Well, I did the analysis and here's what it says. And it turns into such a mess,
Right.
that, like I said, working through that pain up front is really worth it.
So what do you think? I think you have a good perspective on this. How can a company tell whether it has like good reporting in place or not?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, this may seem like super obvious, but the one thing that we've seen is you go tell various members of your marketing go-to-market team to pull certain data, right? And it can be as simple as how many leads did we get last month? How many opportunities did we get? And how many deals did we close? What does a pipeline look like? I mean, these are really obvious metrics. And you will be surprised at how few organizations can say everyone came back with the same numbers. And not only are the numbers often different, but they're vastly different, and they're pulling from different sources, and the timelines are different. And so I think going through that exercise and then sharing kind of the results with the wider team creates that buy-in around, oh, this is a problem. And we really need to work through it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It is really interesting to see. I would say, even working with us, it's a challenge to get people to, I think, like recognizing like where the reports are, what the data means, but get people to actually like live and understand it is probably even more challenging. And so it's a really good exercise, as simple as it is, just to make sure people have access to the same information and are reporting uniformly. It's kind of ties back to some of the conversations we had previously about growth. Growth is no longer like a marketing initiative or a sales initiative. It's company wide. And so it's not okay for your CTO or CIO or your chief product officer to say, I don't know those numbers. Like, everyone needs to feel these numbers, understand like what needs to happen in terms of driving growth. And definitely when you show up at the board meeting, it's not going to be, it won't be an okay answer just to say, we don't fully agree or understand like what our growth objectives are.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the other pieces that I forgot to point out is the exercise should also be time bound, right? Like maybe in 3 months they could all come back with the same numbers, but we're talking like these basic KPIs should be able to be pulled like that. And so you give them 10-15 minutes and then you kind of see what everyone comes back with, because that's part of it. It shouldn't be difficult to get to that level of reporting. It's very high level of reporting. We're not asking for, a very deep dive analysis here. These are metrics that you should know, daily, if not weekly, where you are standing in any given month. And so I think that that's an important piece that I missed when I was describing that, but we should definitely, mention.
So we laid out some standards for good reporting. I'll just be curious to get your thought on this. What we said is that all your reporting should be accurate. So it should be consistent across data sources. So if you say the number of leads in one source is 10, it should say that in other sources or other reports as well. It should be accepted by the entire team. It should be accessible, like everyone should be able to get their reports directly rather than going to a central report giver, essentially, and that it should be all encompassing. Oh, we did everything with A's. I like that. And it should be forward and backward looking. So you should have a clear understanding of how you performed previously, but also set forecasts for the future and say, here's what the goals are. Of those 4 things, what do you think is the most difficult to achieve when it comes to reporting?
Throwing a curveball here.
I know. I'm just.
Well, we talked about, I think alignment is definitely difficult. All 4 of those things are not easy tasks to accomplish. I think we struggle if teams are willing to put in the work to kind of address conflict, then the first 3 of those A's, which I guess are, if now you're testing me, accuracy, alignment, and
Accessible.
what?
Accessible.
Accessible.
People should be able to access them. Yes.
Yeah. So I think those 3 things can be worked through. I think the all-encompassing piece sometimes trips a lot of organizations up. When we really push, when we're creating reporting, to get, even if it's just placeholder targets for forecasts in place, I think it's really important to have that kind of end goal in mind. And organizations will be like, well, we never tracked this before, so we have no idea like what number of leads we're going to get or how many opportunities or what this funnel looks like. which is totally fine, but you have to put the stake in the ground somewhere, and then you can refine it over time. Nobody said you can't change, your forecast methodology. It's not stuck in stone. So I think that piece of it tends to cause a lot of not just challenge within organizations, but kind of will almost cause organizations to not even try. Whereas the other pieces, I feel like, once you get buy-in of the importance of reporting, you can hopefully get address those other three components.
And I think if you feel like your organization is doing a good job, I mean, kudos to you. I would say from the clients that we've dealt with, probably 90% of them don't have good reporting in place. I mean, so if you're struggling with this, definitely realize you're not alone, and this is like a very common problem. And I'm guessing it has to do a lot with the stage of companies we work with, though. It's pretty consistent that many of the companies we deal with struggle with reporting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense, right? A lot of these companies, and we say this all the time, were very successful to date. They were able to grow exponentially and very quickly, and didn't necessarily have to account to anyone around metrics. Like, it all just was working. Timing was right, market was ready, and growth was just reachable. I think a lot of the companies we work with are now, they're PE backed. They have investors who are very much engaged in progress and results, and it's harder to grow. And so you really need to understand how the business is performing, what your different growth levers are, and what's working for you and what's not. And so, the time we engage with a lot of these companies, they're just starting to kind of come to the realization that, things need to be different now. We do need this reporting. And if we don't have it, people are going to ask for it. So I think, to me, it makes sense. But before we move on, I do have to ask you, what do you think is the most challenging or the hardest for organizations of the 4 A's?
I would say the accessibility could probably get around, as long as it was very clear where the reports are coming from. It's definitely been a challenge. I'd say accepted is probably, it's really interesting to see getting people to agree on this, because it's not even, you think a number would be a number, as long as you clearly, in fact, we just are going through this now, as you go through and say, okay, we set up the reporting, say this is how an opportunity is defined. The client, one of the stakeholders within the organization, it really didn't like what the end result was. So the person came back and said, well, this is really what it should be. And so even though it was accurate, everyone could get to that same piece of data very simply, no matter whether you look in Salesforce or in the marketing automation system, everyone could go find that number of opportunities. There wasn't any manipulation, there wasn't any calculations. It was very accurate, but getting it accepted, I think, is probably the hardest challenge. And something that we've seen, it not always on these core metrics, but even with some of the other KPIs, the sales team may not agree the time to contact number is correct, even though it's something that's getting pulled straight out of Salesforce. Right. And so I think getting people to accept the numbers and sign off on them and say, this is what we're going to do going forward, is probably the hardest thing to do.
Yeah. I know. I feel like, we always, and we'll probably talk about this in a future podcast, video cast. What do you call this?
Both. Video. It's going to be both.
Okay. All right. So in a future episode, it's around just the importance of having go-to-market meetings regularly, where you're kind of pulling results and discussing them. And the number of times that we've introduced that to clients, and they're like, yeah, that's a great idea. And we pull the reports, and the whole meeting is spent arguing about the accuracy of the numbers. I can't even count how many times that's happened. And it's so counterproductive, and it's so frustrating to everyone involved. And so I can see alignment or what, no, not alignment. I said alignment.
Acceptance, yeah.
Acceptance.
That's another A. Maybe we just add another one in there. We'll have 5 A's.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great point. And I was going to just say one other thing about board meetings. Last week we said it was, you have to be able to explain your success or failures. The other thing I think let's say of a board meeting is like, they may give you one time to say, we're still working out our numbers, but definitely don't go there twice and say, we're still trying to figure out our numbers. Like that is not going to be a good board meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, you don't have to have the perfect answer. It can be kind of an incremental exercise of continuing to refine your numbers, refine your metrics, and get to a point where you really feel confident about it, but you need to start somewhere.
Right. I mean, the cool thing is once you get this worked out, it does really help drive transformational growth. Like the clients that we know that have put the time in and actually invested in this, like they move forward, like they're able to execute, they are able to understand what the numbers mean, what the changes they make actually mean in terms of the numbers. It's like a breath of fresh air.
Right.
It's really amazing.
And it sounds so obvious. I mean, I don't think this is like rocket science. Like if you
Right.
understand your business, then you're going to manage your business better.
Right.
But yeah, it's just the road to get to a point where everyone kind of has the same understanding of the business can sometimes be a little rocky.
Right. Yeah, totally. Agreed. All right. So that's this week's Mosaic Minute on reporting. Again, seems simple. I think it can be very challenging though, but will pay huge dividends if you put the time in. And so come back next week. We'll get an update on Neethi's construction project, softball team, and any other exciting news out there. So thank you for joining.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.